To survive in central London, you have to learn how to carry the crushing weight of its density, the noise, the friction, the millions of people packed into a relentless concrete grid. Mark Tulloch managed the absolute most volatile intersections of that grid. Running flagship pubs in Covent Garden meant standing on the front line against football hooligans, organized crime, and localized chaos. He kept order using what he called the street code. When trouble walked through the doors, Mark met it with raw physical force. He weaponized his own agitation, a sudden, blinding surge of aggression he called the red mist, to intimidate and dismantle threats. On paper, this made him one of the top-performing operators in the city, clearing huge profit margins for his venues. But that financial success masked a severe internal burnout. His nervous system was locked in perpetual overdrive, processing trauma he refused to acknowledge. Eventually, he stopped protecting his pubs and started punishing people. Throwing a punch became a destructive release valve. It was the only way he knew how to vent the massive, invisible pressure building up inside his own head. But you cannot fight your way out of psychological exhaustion. Using brute force to control the environment around you is a mathematical guarantee that your own internal systems will eventually break down. That breakdown arrived outside a bar in Newcastle. Mark provoked a group of outlaw bikers, expecting his usual armor of rage to protect him. Instead, the red mist never showed up. He was brutally beaten and left humiliated on the pavement. The physical beating was immediately followed by a professional one. Back in London, he was quietly sacked from his flagship venue. There was no argument, no grand exit, just a short meeting over coffee, and his keycard was deactivated. His authority, his patch, and his identity evaporated in an afternoon. With no immediate threat to punch and no pub to defend, Mark was left entirely alone with his own mind. Without a target to absorb his aggression, his psychological structure fractured from the inside out. A strong jaw and a triangle choke are entirely useless if you cannot sit quietly in an empty room. Physical resilience means nothing without mental mastery. Following decades of extreme emotional oscillations, bouncing between high-performing mania and crushing depressions, Mark received a clinical diagnosis of bipolar type 1. The standard medical narrative treats this as a lifelong defect that needs to be suppressed. Mark rejected that framework entirely. Drawing on his experience running complex hospitality venues, he decided to approach his own mind as an engineering problem. He realized that the intense energy of a manic upswing or a depressive drop isn't a biological enemy. It is a highly sensitive neurological interface. It provides massive amounts of raw data about his environment and his nervous system. When you reframe a psychological disorder as an operational system, your goal shifts. You stop trying to numb the symptoms and you start optimizing the output. To build this new operating system, Mark developed a mechanic he calls the observer within. Instead of drowning in an emotional wave the moment it hits, you step back and watch the wave roll in. This creates meta-awareness. Intense feelings are converted into measurable data before you react. Surges of frustration are intercepted by the observer, redirecting the intensity into rapid problem-solving. Conversely, a depressive dip is interpreted as a mandatory signal, requesting physical rest to restore the system. By expanding the space between an emotional trigger and physical response, you gain absolute tactical clarity. You are no longer controlled by the chaos. You direct it. Today, Mark has replaced the concrete friction of London with the expansive, structured equilibrium of Bali. This concept master plan illustrates his current reality. He still runs high-stakes hospitality operations and executive management projects, like the Lumindra sanctuary, but he operates them without a trace of his old reactive aggression. He relies on a principle he calls the discipline of stillness. When a sudden operational crisis hits the kitchen or the floor, he doesn't shout or physically enforce compliance. He holds his frame, stepping back to let the team process and solve the issue without his panic adding to the fire. These principles of meta-awareness are baked directly into the daily operations of his businesses. Staff briefings involve breathwork and rhythm, replacing forced top-down authority with a sustainable structural flow. The ultimate strength of a leader isn't measured by how loud they can shout or how hard they can fight. True strategic leadership is built by architecting the internal stillness required to sit quietly and effectively inside the surrounding chaos.